How are you guys all doing today? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiegue, live today on Thursday, September 5th. After months of just talking about football, we finally get some on our screens tonight. The 2024 regular season will kick off in just a matter of hours, with the Ravens traveling to the Kansas City Chiefs to kick off the season. Of course, we're going to talk about that game. We're going to preview that in one of the upcoming segments on today's show. We're going to start off by talking about Pat Surtain's deal, however, in the first segment, reacting to it and going into further detail on what kind of contract that he got. And later on, we're going to make some more predictions with the divisions, of course, finishing that series up and making my 2024 early playoff predictions for each conference. So a lot of predicting, a lot of projecting in today's episode. Make sure to stick around for the entire show right before leading off to the kickoff game for the NFL. But before we get into our first segment, like we just talked about, with the NFL officially kicking off, I want to hear more than ever what you guys have to say on the topics, what I say, on any games coming up, any predictions you guys want to make. I want to hear what you guys have to say. Your input, your insight is always well received on all of our shows. And now, if you want to make it absolutely sure that your messages get featured on our live shows, make sure to check out the super chat feature that we have available to you guys. Just click the $ at the bottom of the chat box to send in your super chat. This way, it guarantees that your message gets on the air, and it's also a fantastic way to support our channel. We rely on your support to keep bringing you the sports content that you love, and we appreciate it so much every time you guys are able to do that. So go ahead, let us know what you're thinking. Hit the super chat button, and let's keep this show as interactive and as exciting as possible. But lastly, if you do prefer the alternative, you are still able to use the tip and donations link, gsmcpodcast.net, to tip and donate and leave any question or comment there if you prefer. We couldn't do this without your amazing support, and we're always so thankful. So make sure to please, again, use the super chat feature with any questions or comments that you'd want to make during today's show. But now we can finally get into talking about some football, sort of. We have to get into talking about the defense, this defensive contract that Pat Surtain got. This new contract yesterday, breaking news, the Denver Broncos came to an agreement with their star defensive back, Pat Surtain, on a new historical 4-year, $96 million contract extension, $24 million per year going Pat Surtain's way, now becoming the highest paid defensive back in NFL history. Also, with $77 million guaranteed to Pat Surtain II, only 24 years old, drafted 9th overall in 2021, a Pro Bowler the last 2 years, and a first-team All-Pro already back in 2022, and only his second year in the NFL. So, very well deserved. Obviously, right, I don't think you can say much more than that. To be expected, I don't know if I would say that at this moment. It's not like it was, brought up in the media, or it was brought up a lot, like they were trying to work this out. It just came out of nowhere. But again, I don't think anybody will have a problem with this. Making him the highest paid defensive back in NFL history is well deserved, obviously, but I would be lying if I said that I wasn't surprised by it, because I didn't think it was going to jump up to 24. And it's funny because we brought up on this show the comment Micah Parsons made on his podcast a few days ago now, where he brought up the idea that wide receivers are getting paid so handsomely, talking 35, 34, well over $30 million for a couple of guys now, and their counterparts, their direct opposite, their direct matchups with defensive backs, some of the best in the league, are only making $20, $21 million per year, $15 million less on average than the top paid wide receivers. And for what all they do for matching up with them one-on-one and being most of the time on islands by themselves, and shutting down a top tier wide receiver as best as they can, a lot of the times they end up losing, right? A lot of the times defensive backs, you always hear it, have to have a short memory, have to just move on to the next play, because it's extremely hard from a physical standpoint, obviously, and staying disciplined if you're in zones or anything like that. I believe they're rivaling quarterbacks for the hardest position in the NFL. That's just my idea. So I did agree with Micah back then when we talked about it, but now, even still, even though I did agree with it, I still approached it with a cautious mindset that anybody else that got extended probably, I was thinking maybe was going to get $21.5 million or at most 22 or 22.5, not jumping up all the way to 24. They're creeping up a little bit on some pass rushers that are making $25 million per year. I want to say some offensive linemen. They're making, or Pat Surtain, I guess just Pat Surtain is making more than some offensive linemen as well. So I think it's just opening the door now, because with him getting paid, now, we're very much in that realm that the next few guys after him, if they're right up there with his level of, ability and defensive prowess and just ability to shut down opposing wide receivers, like someone like Sauce Gardner, they're going to ask for a lot of money and they're next up to get paid. So now we're sort of venturing into that area where it's becoming more acceptable, and it's great. It's great to see defensive backs getting, some more recognition than they already do. AJ Terrell was one of the latest ones to get his extension, and he's only at $20.25 million. And speaking of AJ Terrell, with Pat Surtain now becoming the highest paid defensive back in NFL history, he also becomes the highest paid secondary player currently in the NFL, passing Antoine Winfield's $21.025 million as well. He's the highest paid safety. He obviously surpassed Jair Alexander when he got his deal, but now Pat Surtain jumps over both of them, and he resets the top 5 in terms of defensive backs. You look at Surtain making $24 million per year. Jair Alexander now at second at $21 million. AJ Terrell, like I said, close to $20 million. Denzel Ward also at $20.1 million. And Jalen Ramsey at an even $20 million per year as well. So that's the new top 5. Pat Surtain opening up this door now for guys like I mentioned before. Sauce Gardner is probably in contention right there with Pat Surtain with being a 1A, 1B corner. A lot of people are split on it. I think in ESPN's polls this year, I think Pat Surtain got the number 1 spot. I could be wrong. Or actually, no, I think it was Pat Surtain. I think it was Pat Surtain, or it was Denzel Ward. I kind of got it mixed up, but it was one of those two. They got the top spot. Sauce Gardner was actually at 3 this year. A little surprising, but with how, it all works out in terms of contracts when you get drafted, Sauce Gardner is now going into the 3rd year of his contract, of his rookie deal. So after this year, he'll be right in that prime window to get extended, heading into the last year of his rookie deal. Obviously still having that 5th year option, but it would benefit the Jets to get this deal done sooner rather than later, now that Pat Surtain has opened up this avenue for corners to start asking for a little bit more now. Now you're not going to have guys asking for no more than 21. Now they're going to venture into 23, 22. Maybe someone resets it. Sauce Gardner could be that at $25 million per year. Who knows? He's on a great trajectory to do that, right? In his first 2 years, making the All-Pro team in his first 2 years in the league. And I don't see a reason why he couldn't do it again. That defense didn't get any worse. If only they got better by association to their offense, right? With Aaron Rodgers there, now it's extremely hard to play from behind in the NFL, obviously, right? You're not allowed to be as aggressive as you'd want to be on defense, right? You always want to get after the quarterback and that way force them into bad situations. But a lot of the times, mainly all their games last year, the Jets had to play from behind, and now their defense has to try and not get blown out or overextend this lead for the opposing team. They're not able to really play to their strengths. And even so, Sauce Gardner made an All-Pro team, still one of the best corners in the league. Now with Aaron Rodgers coming back, of course it helps their offense, but defensively, it allows them to hopefully get into positions where they're in front of their opponents. They get the lead, pretty decent lead, and now you can have those pass rushers pin their ears back, get after the quarterback, and Sauce Gardner in man coverage, getting opportunities to actually get the ball thrown to him more often than not this year, I think could give him more of an opportunity now to make another All-Pro team. be up there, considered one of the best corners in the NFL. And if he does all of that, I know the Jets are in this spot right now, still trying to work out Hassan Reddick's deal. But other than that, I don't see much that could be on their plate heading into next year in terms of contracts. So that should be something that they want to get done as one of their first priorities. And it all has to do with Pat Surtain now resetting the cornerback market. Big impact on the rest of the NFL. But something else to keep in mind just before we move on, like we said before, with the league being a salary cap league, obviously, when one position starts to get paid a little bit more, another position starts to lose out sometimes on some money. If you're now having cornerbacks venture into the $24, $25 million range, it could potentially hurt another position. That's just how it all works, pushing and pulling with each position. So I'll be interested to see if that becomes evident over the next, year or two with corners getting extended. But overall, happy for Pat Surtain to get this deal. Regardless of what the Broncos end up being this year, he's not just a cornerstone piece for their defense. He's one of the faces of their entire team, entire franchise already. Sort of restarting, trying to get Bo Nix in here and find success with him, but he's not moving anywhere. The Broncos make sure to lock him down for the foreseeable future. So great decision by the Broncos, good for them, and of course good for Pat Surtain. But now that we have that out of the way, we're going to go into our first break, but when we return, we're going to get into fully talking about the Chiefs and the Ravens game that is set to kick off in about 2 hours from now. We're going to preview the game. I'll give you some key matchups, some key factors I'll be looking out for, and my prediction for who's going to win that game later on. So stay tuned. A lot more to talk about on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Jumping back into the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, and finally getting to the day, getting to the moment now where we can start previewing some of these games. The 2024 NFL regular season is going to kick off in just a matter of time here, so let's get fully into it. Talking about now, finally, the Ravens traveling to Kansas City to take on the Chiefs, a rematch of the AFC Conference Championship game from last year. The Chiefs won that game by a score of 17-10, very low scoring. A lot of takeaways from that game that we'll get into, but just overall, first Thursday night football game of the regular season on NBC or Peacock on tonight's game, not Amazon Prime, for any of you guys wondering about that. And yeah, getting into those narratives, talking about this brewing rivalry. Now, I guess you could sort of call it with the Ravens and the Chiefs. I think they've played enough that I would start to call it a little bit of a rivalry, especially when you have such prominent faces of the NFL at the quarterback position, right, at such an important spot. Having these two guys battle up against each other, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning-esque, Tom Brady, who else has he battled, I guess, honestly? It's escaping my mind, but anyway, talking about this game and just how now we're getting into this area where we're looking at this game, very exciting, very potent offenses, very star players, very much star players on each side. And now we're going to get into, obviously, the matchups, the predictions, and everything like that. But just starting off on each team, talking about first the Kansas City Chiefs and any news, injuries, or anything related to them to start off. This offseason has been a very positive one, honestly, for the Chiefs, adding a guy like Xavier Worthy. Rashee Rice now in his second year. I don't think, and it doesn't look like, a suspension could potentially come this year. It's a little bit murky in how it's all being played out right now. It shouldn't be imminent, is what I'm trying to say. Right now, it seems for Rashee Rice, so it looks like he's going to be pretty much, very much involved right off the get-go. So having him in his second year, developing, making that jump, hopefully, from year 1 to year 2 is going to be huge. No Marquise Brown, unfortunately, tonight for the Kansas City Chiefs. He injured his shoulder in the preseason. He was close to coming back. They felt optimistic about his recovery, but they didn't want to rush him. He's sitting out this week, but I wouldn't be surprised if he is in the lineup next week. Also on the injury news, Chris Jones and Joe Thuney were full participants yesterday, and they should be 100% for the game later tonight. But one player that they will be without will be Charles Omenihu, one of their better pass rushers from last year. He starts the year on the PUP list, so he's expected to be out for a good amount of time, probably until November. So that pass rush is going to be a little not as potent as it usually is, but even still, I think that is as good as you'd want it to be right now for the Kansas City Chiefs to start off the year. Relatively healthy, really just Charles Omenihu, and you got better. You undoubtedly got better on offense with the wide receivers now that Patrick Mahomes has the ability to throw to compared to last year, dealing with the drops and the miscommunications, the frustrations. Travis Kelce, potentially, if you want to put that narrative out there, losing a step. That could be true depending on how you saw it, but now not only will this help their offense, I think will in hand also help Travis Kelce. Not that much attention on him compared to last year when you have just speed, endless amounts of speed on the outside with Worthy, Marquise Brown when he comes back, now Rashee Rice also getting better. I like this Chiefs offense, the offensive line as well. Not many changes. I think just one spot on there has changed from last year. So that's where the Chiefs stand heading into this game in good form. Then you look at the Ravens, and I start to become a little bit more hesitant and weary of where they stand right now, because you look at some of the positives. You look at Derrick Henry right off of the bat, the acquisition of potentially all of free agency coming over to join Lamar Jackson in that offense for the Ravens. It's going to be one of the best duos in the NFL. It just is because of who Derrick Henry is, and now you pair him up with someone like Lamar. It's going to be a nightmare for opposing defenses, but also some more positives before I get into my doubts. Zay Flowers heading into his second year. I really liked how he grew over the course of last year. He showed some great signs not only towards the end of the regular season, but also, I think, in the playoffs. Yeah, the AFC Conference Championship game didn't go his way. He had a unsportsmanlike conduct, then he fumbled the ball into the end zone. Only his first year. It's not gonna affect his career or anything like that too much, right? We're only going from year 1 to year 2. He's gonna grow. He's gonna learn from that. He's gonna be a better player from that. And to me, he's probably already their best receiver. With what I've seen from Rashad Bateman, Nelson Aguilar potentially as well on their team, I think Zay already after just 1 year gives you more consistency than I've seen out of those two guys. But of course, their tight ends are a main part of their passing game. Mark Andrews back healthy. Isaiah Likely, hopefully he gets some more looks this year after breaking out a little bit last year in the playoffs. But now getting into some of my concerns with this team and some of the news that we had over the offseason, they lost a lot of guys, some pretty significant guys on both sides. On the offensive side of the ball, they lost guys like Morgan Moses, Kevin Zeitler, John Simpson, all three starters on their offensive line. Then on the defensive side of the ball, also losing three guys in Geno Stone. A lot of turnovers coming from Geno Stone, so they're certainly going to miss him. Jadeveon Clowney, one of the sack leaders for this defense last year. Now he is in Carolina. And also, probably their most significant loss, in my opinion, throughout the entire offseason was Patrick Queen, not only leaving, but joining the Steelers as well. That duo, I don't think people really realize how fortunate the Ravens are to have, obviously, Roquan Smith, but to have Patrick Queen, considered one of the best linebackers, also right next to him, and to have both of those guys, nobody is getting the edge on those two guys. Basically, you're not turning the corner on the outsides. Both guys are always there, always sniffing it out, and it's a nightmare to deal with one of them. But like I said, having both of them, the sidelines and turning those corners were off limits, and that was a big part of their defense. And speaking of their defense, also their former defensive coordinator, Mike Macdonald, he is now the head coach of the Seahawks this year. So there's going to be a new defensive coordinator in there as well. A lot of new pieces now on this defense trying to go up against Patrick Mahomes. The toughest test right off of the bat for this new defense, and it has me a little bit worried. It has me worried right now that the Ravens are coming into this game with a bit more uncertainty. Of course, they're never going to say that they have doubts or anything like that, but I think most people would agree that that is something to point out to, and that leads me into my next part of this preview, the matchups and the key factors that will ultimately decide this game, I feel like, in my opinion, right? Starting off with Patrick Mahomes and this sort of new offense. It's still the same system, but how they incorporate Xavier Worthy, how Rashee Rice looks, their running game as well. I want to see how this Chiefs offense goes up against this new look Baltimore Ravens defense, right? For all the reasons that I just shared. A lot of new weapons on each side. You still have the prominent guys on each side, right? Kyle Hamilton, Roquan Smith, Nnamdi Madubuike now. Those guys for the Baltimore Ravens. And on the Chiefs, still obviously Patrick, Travis Kelce, and Isaiah Pacheco. But there are now new elements that I would love to see how quickly each side gets them incorporated, and just overall that offense versus that defense, how similar does it look to last year, right? Because in the AFC Championship game, it was a very low-scoring affair. The defenses were the ultimate stars in those matchups, but now it could be a little bit more offensive. You look at Derrick Henry coming over, all the guys that I mentioned for the Chiefs. I want to see if that dynamic changes in this first game. And then also just flipping it for each team, how Baltimore's receivers, Mark Andrews, Isaiah Likely, Zay Flowers, go up against this Kansas City Chiefs secondary, because L'Jarius Sneed is now gone. Now Trent McDuffie is the number one corner. I have no doubts with Trent, but the rest of the crew around him, how do they step up to the challenge and try to stop the receivers of the Baltimore Ravens? And also, moving on to another matchup, I have the Chiefs defensive line going up against that new offensive line for the Baltimore Ravens and Derrick Henry. If you want to look at it a bit more direct, Chris Jones going up against Tyler Linderbaum and also trying to stop Derrick Henry, right? Chris Jones is going to be in the middle of a lot of action going on between the trenches, and you have two new guards coming in. They're going to see a lot of Chris Jones. I'm sure they're going to move him around as much as possible. And how disciplined is this offensive line for the Ravens now, going up against one of the best, if not the best, defensive tackle currently in the NFL? It's a big test right off of the bat. And if you want to get that running game going, you need them to stand up, because Derrick Henry isn't the fastest guy to get out there to the sides, and he's not the smallest guy to fit in between any small holes that you might create. You need to create some pretty decent size gaps for Derrick Henry to run through, and I want to see how successful they are in that, or are the Chiefs going to dominate them in this first game? And one also, just talking about the key figures in this game, Patrick Mahomes against Roquan Smith, each guy quarterbacking their side. Roquan Smith potentially covering Travis Kelce, another great matchup there. How do they each manipulate their chess pieces and get each of their teams in the best position possible? Very interested in those matchups, sort of like Tom Brady, Ray Lewis-esque, right, to throw an example out there. But now to my predictions, it falls pretty much in line as to how I'm putting it out there, right? I just think right now first game of the season, right? We're just getting into this right at the early stages of this entire journey. The Ravens, to me, I think just have more to figure out with their team than the Chiefs do at this point. You know, you have everybody coming in. The ring ceremony is tonight, if I'm not mistaken. Everyone's excited there to have the Chiefs at home for the first game, and the Ravens coming in there trying to get revenge, trying to avenge their loss from that championship game where they lost at home. Now they're trying to repay it to the Chiefs. But defensively, I'm just not sure how they're going to stand up without any of those guys. I have to see it first before I become confident in the Ravens. And also on the offensive side of the ball, for how much they run it, that offensive line has to be very good. And again, 3 new pieces is a lot on an offensive line. So I feel like just tonight, the Chiefs have less to worry about. I feel like they're a little bit more prepared at this stage. I'm going to say the Chiefs win tonight, 24-17. I think the changes just for Baltimore are a little bit too much to try and figure out just in this first game of the regular season. It's still going to be decently close. You know, there's still good players on each side, but I think the Chiefs are in a better spot right now to start the year. But I'd love to know what you guys think. Who do you think will win tonight between the Chiefs and the Ravens, and whether or not is it going to be close? Is it going to be a blowout? Leave your guys' thoughts in the chat box using the new super chat feature at the bottom of the chat box. But with that being the case now, we're going to move on, not too far off, now heading into new segments. We're going to break down and predict the AFC playoff picture towards the end of the year. Just before kickoff right now, obviously, I'm going to give you guys my thoughts on who's going to make the playoffs, seeds 1 through 7, and why I decided that these 7 teams are going to make the playoffs from the AFC. And then in this following segment, we're going to do the NFC as well. So those predictions, my predictions, are coming up in just a few seconds. Don't go anywhere.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
We are back here now on the show, getting into some more predictions for the rest of today's episode, talking in this first segment about my predictions for the AFC conference on who is going to make the playoffs, seeds 1 through 7, and then in the following segment, we're going to touch on the NFC side of things. So without messing around, without talking too much about this segment, we're going to jump straight into it. On your screen are the 7 teams that I think are going to make the playoffs in the AFC this year. We're going to talk through each one of them. I'll explain my reasonings why, and why some teams will not make it ultimately in the 7 teams here that I have on my screen. So starting off from the easiest one, I think the Chiefs, number 1 seed, they got better from last year. I believe they were the number 2 seed. I could be wrong. I feel like I'm right. I feel like they were the number 2 seed last year, if my memory serves me right. Even then, they were the number 2 seed with, arguably, like people were saying, one of the worst offenses that Patrick Mahomes has had to deal with. Now they get better on that side of the ball. Don't lose too much on the defensive side of the ball either. You know, they pretty much have everybody coming back, apart from L'Jarius Sneed. He's going to be a big miss, but I think it's something that it won't harm them too much just because of the emergence of Trent McDuffie. So Kansas City Chiefs winning that division, obviously. Not an overly tough schedule. I want to say they're near the middle of the pack as well. They got better on offense, should have enough to cover, like I said, the departure of L'Jarius Sneed. So they're going to win their division and be the number 1 team in the AFC. Then moving on to Houston, winning the AFC South like we went over in the yesterday's segment, predicting who was going to finish where in that division. I had the Houston Texans finishing first. They're going to be so good this year, I believe that they're going to go all the way up to the number 2 seed. They have a top 5 most difficult schedule in the NFL, which is really my only worry with this team, because I can't point out anything on their roster that I'm really overly concerned with, other than maybe if I'm really trying to make an effort to point out a position, maybe the opposing cornerback opposite of Derek Stingley, but that's pretty much it. Everywhere else, you have great players, all pro level players, most likely, at each spot, and a lot of the times I feel like that's going to be enough. When you're talking about having a top five toughest schedule in the NFL, it's hard to put out a difference, right? It's hard to find differences when you're constantly playing against good teams, but not a lot of teams that they will face have as much talent as the Texans do on their roster. Just offensively, only a handful of teams, probably only 2 or maybe even 3 that I can think of in the entire NFL that can go toe-to-toe roster-wise, ability-wise with the Texans. And just talking about the AFC, they're right amongst the best, right up there with the Chiefs in my opinion. So having all that talent at their disposal, the trajectory already that everybody has CJ Stroud at, same thing with Tank Dell, Nico Collins coming off of a great year, Stephon Diggs, we mentioned it yesterday, on sort of his own villain arc heading into 2024. All of that is a recipe for success, I believe, for this team. And I haven't even talked about Joe Mixon as well, another upgrade on the offensive side of the ball. They should be the number 2 team as well, and potentially could be in contention for that number 1 seed as well. So that's the Chiefs and Texans. Now moving on to the Ravens. For all my concerns that I had with them, just talking about it in the preview last segment, I feel like having Lamar, Patrick, Joe, Josh Allen, these guys, is the ultimate game changer, is the ultimate, trick that all these great teams really have. It's what makes the difference a lot of the times when teams make the playoffs, win the division. They have this type of player on their roster, and having Lamar, guys like Mark Andrews around him, Derrick Henry added now to the mix, I feel like they have enough to win that division. I really do. Their defense, great players as well on that side of the ball. Marlon Humphrey, Kyle Hamilton, Roquan Smith. Those guys, I feel like they have enough. They have a top 3 toughest schedule in the NFL. That's something else to watch out for. But again, Lamar coming off of another MVP, I feel like they should have enough to cover for most of it. They could arguably be higher, but because of that tough schedule, I had them down to the number 3 seed in the AFC conference. But the only reason I feel like they couldn't win this division, and it could go to the Cincinnati Bengals that I will touch on in a matter of moments, is because that offensive line is really struggling, and it is a possibility when you have 3 new guys being placed into these starting roles, but I don't know. I just feel like the talent that they have is enough to cover it. The offensive line is huge, don't get me wrong. It is a big determinant on what separates you from being at a good team to an elite team, especially for how much the Ravens run the ball, but I have confidence in them. I think they do have enough to still win that division. Then at number 4, we have the Miami Dolphins. They were close to winning the division last year. They ultimately fell on their face on their way to doing that, losing to the Bills in those 2 games. Now I feel like they'll get the job done. They have enough talent to do so. They had enough talent to do it last year, and I just think it was a matter of just not being in that position enough over the course of the last few years. Now with a head coach like Mike McDaniel, getting that extension, well-deserved as well. I think now with the emphasis on this team, I think the injection of confidence more and more as time passes with McDaniel, Jalen Waddle, Tyreek, I think they're starting to become more comfortable in who they are, especially committing that massive contract to Tua. I feel like they're in a comfortable spot now where they're putting all their chips to the middle of the table and really going for this thing. And they have a very favorable schedule as well, the easiest schedule in the AFC East. So that on top of their talent. I feel like they're going to do the job this year, but it's not going to be anything groundbreaking where they're the 1 through 3 seeds. I think they're going to win their division, take baby steps right in this whole process, and win their division this year and be matched up against the Cincinnati Bengals, because I have them as my 5th seed in the playoffs for the AFC. It looks like Jamar Chase is going to play. He practiced yesterday. I'm pretty sure he practiced today as well. Still no contract, so, there's still always a chance there that something else could cause a turn in this entire situation. But it's so amazing seeing a duo, a quarterback to wide receiver duo, and how much that really is so unstoppable for a team that you might look at this team and have questions at running back with Joe Mixon being gone. Still questions on the offensive line. Trey Hendrickson was another player that on the defensive side of the ball requested a trade. He's looking for a new contract. T. Higgins, he's probably going to leave after this year. But all of that being a fact, having a top quarterback and a top wide receiver can make you just forget about that in just a matter of moments, and that's what they have in Joe and Jamar. If Jamar plays, I think a lot of that will just go right under the radar, and it won't look like they have any problems with those two guys out there on the field. They're that good, and the reason why I have them at the number 5 seed really is because you look at the schedule that they have. They have the 16th hardest schedule in the NFL, but compared to the other teams in their division, the Steelers, the Ravens, and the Browns, those 3 other teams have the 3 toughest schedules in the. I think it's going to make a huge difference. Joe Burrow is trying to come back with a vengeance, trying to stay healthy this entire year after being injured yet again last year. I think all of that, if he stays healthy, they're going to be in a great position making the playoffs based on all of that. Then at 6, call it controversial, call it delusional, whatever you want. I'm not moving the Steelers out of the playoffs until, 1, Mike Tomlin shows me that he has a losing season. Knock on wood that it's not this year. But they're a better team than they are last year. They just are. You look at the quarterback spot, and I don't have to say too much more other than that. For as much criticism as Russell Wilson received last year, and the Broncos as a whole, and as well as the Steelers from their quarterback spot, Russell Wilson had a solid year last year for the Broncos. A big reason why they won a lot of those games, and it's no question that he played better than all the Steelers quarterbacks combined. And if that wasn't enough, Justin Fields wasn't that far off from also having a better season than all their quarterbacks last year as well. So improving at that spot is huge. They have a new offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, which people are excited about, but you have to see the product on the field, obviously, first before we make any irrational decisions. But they're just a better team to me this year. The quarterback question and whether or not Russ is going to start, Russ is starting, but how long he stays at that spot, when does Justin Fields potentially come in, how they navigate that situation is going to be critical. And also, the end of year schedule is probably the hardest in the NFL, with all of their divisional games there towards the end, and also playing the Eagles and the Chiefs around Christmas time. So that's going to be a massive part of their schedule, but adding guys like Patrick Queen, drafting very well, getting 2 great offensive linemen, I think is going to help them out tremendously. The wide receiver position is still a question, right? You'd like to have more talent there, but I feel like it's just what they do. I'm not going to doubt them like most people do and just act surprised when they're probably in the playoff hunt towards the end of the year. It's happened too many times. I think they're going to make it yet again. They were at this spot last year as well with a worse quarterback. So if they improve that spot, I don't see why they can't make it again. And then lastly, the last team to make it will be the New York Jets. Aaron Rodgers, obviously, I'm assuming he's going to stay healthy the entire year, and that's going to make the difference, right? They're going to be in contention to push the Dolphins for that division, but I feel like the Dolphins are in a better spot than the Jets are right now. The Jets are still trying to get all their pieces in order. They have all of them, but seeing how they look towards the end of the year, who's really stepping up, who's available, who's, just stepping up in those moments, like I said, for Aaron Rodgers, I think it's going to be huge. But their defense, again, one of the best in the NFL. We just talked about it, and Aaron Rodgers coming back is going to be a massive difference. The only doubt I do have would be their play calling, how certain situations are handled with Robert Saleh at head coach and Nathaniel Hackett as the offensive coordinator. Not to throw shade on them or anything like that, but I think once you get into the top 7 teams in the conference, you look at all these head coaches, DeMeco Ryan, John Harbaugh, Andy Reid, Mike Tomlin, Mike McDaniel. Coaching does matter when you're getting into, making the cut for the playoffs. So that will be something that I will keep an eye on over the course of this year, how Nathaniel Hackett is calling plays, if he's getting any scrutiny, or similarly, Robert Saleh as well. But they're good enough to make the playoffs. They have a good enough roster now. If Aaron Rodgers stays healthy, that's the biggest thing this year. So that's the AFC side of things. These are the teams that will make the playoffs. We'll revisit this halfway through the year and see if we make any changes. But for right now, I'm confident in these 7 teams. I think most of them will be in the playoffs in 2024. But not too far off of this segment, we're going to come back after our next break and talk about the other conference, the NFC, and see which teams from there that I have picked will be in the 2024 playoffs in the 1 through 7 seedings again. We're going to go through each one like I just did and talk about it, why these 7 teams are going to be in the playoffs. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Back here on the show now to continue on from our last segment, talking about who was going to make the playoffs in the AFC conference for this year. Now we're going to talk about the other conference, the NFC, which 7 teams are going to make it this year out of a very competitive and I think a very top-heavy conference, more so than the AFC. So looking at the teams that I have making the playoffs for this conference, I think, one, it was very hard to do, just predicting it, but I feel confident that these 7 teams will make it. There are some surprises in there. We're going to get into all of them. Starting off with number 1, I think the Eagles will have enough this year, more so on the fact that I feel like the Niners will struggle some more this year, but I will touch on that more in just a second. But sticking to the Eagles, I think their roster and just how last year ended for them, very bad note. Jalen Hurts didn't play great as much as it was the play calling and everything like that. He didn't have his best season. The coordinators, at the heart of pretty much all the criticism with what went on with Brian Johnson, Sean Desai, Matt Patricia, all these guys, Nick Sirianni thrown in there as well. It was just a mess. Now, with 2 new coordinators, Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio coming in with that experience, I think that by default will help tremendously. Nick Sirianni taking more of a backseat approach now, I think, is one very big of him to do, knowing that this season is big for the Philadelphia Eagles, not just because they are still considered one of the best teams, but now after having some inconsistency, right, you make the Super Bowl, then the next year you sort of fall off towards the end. You can't have that sort of fluctuation, especially when you add guys like Devin White, Saquon Barkley, obviously Jahan Dotson's in there now. The offensive line is still very good. They have all the pieces, a very talented roster to compete with any of these teams. So, also they have a very favorable schedule. I thought I wrote it down. I think there's something like, I think they have like the 21st hardest schedule in the NFL, easiest schedule of all these teams that I think will be competing for this number 1 seed. So all of that sort of plays in their favor. It does play in their favor fully, and I think the Eagles will jump up to that number 1 spot. Then at number 2, just falling off a little bit, not too much. the San Francisco 49ers winning their division, the NFC West, no doubt about that. But I feel like the Rams are going to be right there with them. I think they're really going to push them. And not only that, maybe sneakily you can have a close game there with the Cardinals with how much everyone's hyping them up. But I think the 49ers are still obviously the better team. The Seahawks are there as well. How are they going to operate with their new head coach, Mike McDaniel? That division got a little bit better. Clearly still the 49ers are the best team, but I feel like this year there's going to be a bit more of a struggle, a bit more of a threat from those teams, and the pressure that they're going to feel this year, right? Everything is going to be micro-analyzed for them. Looking at Brock Purdy, just right on the verge of becoming extension eligible. How does Brandon Ayuk look now after the big mess that he made trying to get his extension? How does he look? I don't really have too many doubts about him, but that's something else that people could point out. No questions about Trent Williams, but the defense as well, looking at some guys still not back. You look at Talanoa Hufanga. How healthy will he be at the start of the year? Dre Greenlaw won't be there to start the year as well. I feel like this year with the pressure mounted on them, everybody's, saying that they have to do it this year with the threat of potentially losing one of these core players with Brock Purdy's extension coming up. I think that pressure could cause some lapses that we didn't see last year. So I have them falling off a little bit, but the number 2 seed is still very good, obviously. Then at number 3, I had my surprise team, but the more and more people talk about them, I think more they start believing that the Packers are right up there with some of the best teams in the NFC. And this one was a hard decision to make because I did pick the Packers to finish first in this division, so I had to put them here at number 3. And it is a big call, obviously, with how good the Lions are at that number 5 spot, as you see, but I will get to them later. But the Packers, to make this big of a jump just in just continuation from last year in the playoffs, looking as good as they did, to jump up to this number 3 spot, I think would be a great accomplishment just in the matter of Jordan Love's first year as the starter to now in his second year as the full starter, taking over and becoming a top 3 team in that conference. I'm still confident in them, though, with that being a potential question. I'd like this Packers team, there's definitely going to be a ton of competition from this division alone. You look at all those teams I think could make a run at the playoffs. The Vikings got a little bit unlucky, right, with J.J. McCarthy being hurt. Not to discredit Sam Darnold, but, you kind of know what you're going to get out of him. To see a massive, massive change from him, I'll be just as surprised as anybody. But their division is a big reason why I potentially didn't have them higher, just because the Bears, the Lions, obviously, as you guys see, they're going to be great, in my opinion. So the Packers at still number 3. Their offense just getting more experienced from the playoff run they went on last year. Jordan Love is still my pick for MVP, so bringing the Packers to the number 3 seed in the playoffs, I think, would just only help that out. And it's an exciting team, exciting offense, adding Josh Jacobs, and their defense also very underrated with the pass rush, the defensive line that they have as well. So the Packers will be a top 3 team this year, in my opinion, in the NFC, that is. Then at number 4, we have the Atlanta Falcons. I think everyone's pick for this division, for this spot. I feel like they will still struggle, right, making this transition now into a full-fledged playoff team. There's still going to be some bumps in the road trying to get everything under wraps with a new quarterback, new coordinator, new head coach and everything. But still, they're super talented. They're very talented enough to at least compete with Tampa Bay for this division. They're going to be the number 4th seed because I think this division is the weakest one out of all of them. In contention with the NFC East, but the Eagles are going to run away with it. So the Falcons are going to be here. They're going to have a top 4 team in the NFC. And I'll be interested to see how Kirk, once they get to the playoffs, how he navigates, being back in the playoffs, right? Because he doesn't have a great playoff record per se. He is a great quarterback. In the regular season, he puts up numbers. you don't want to compare him to Dak or anything like that, but in the playoffs, not as glowing as he does show out in the regular season, but that's still a long ways away. It could change this year with a better team around him, so we'll see. But I think just sticking to this seed specifically, the Falcons definitely do have enough to win this division. They're my pick, and they have the easiest schedule in the entire NFL, so it is just right there for them for the taking. It's going to be a massive disappointment if they don't win it, in my opinion. So I have them at the number 4 spot. Then at number 5, a surprise, I think, for a lot of people, because the Lions are a great team. The Lions are a fantastic team. You saw it in the NFC Championship game last year. They have enough to get there, but I already picked the Packers to win this division. It doesn't make sense now to have the Lions as a top 3 team. I have to stick with my pick, so the Lions, unfortunately, are not going to have home field advantage in the playoffs. They're going to be the best team that didn't win their division this year in the NFC, and even still, when you have that good of a team, I don't think it necessarily matters too much, per se. You look at the Lions last year, they were steamrolling the 49ers in San Francisco. They had home field advantage, throughout the rest of it, and that definitely helped out against, you could say, the Rams, you could say the Bucks for a certain extent, but overall, I think building off of their performance from last year, now getting Amon-Ra St. Brown, my pick for the Offensive Player of the Year, full-fledged again, trying to push himself even more into that conversation of the best receivers. I think they have enough definitely to run the table, if you want to call it that, and beat anybody of the top 4 teams. Honestly, this conference overall is that close, but I picked the Packers to win the division. The Lions are a great team. I think they have enough, obviously, to be there. They upgraded on defense, especially, adding secondary pieces that they didn't have last year. The big worry for me is the pass rush for them. Someone opposite of I'm forgetting his name now. Aiden Hutchinson, someone opposite of Aiden Hutchinson is a concern for me, but everywhere else you look, they have a great player at each position. The offensive line is insane for them, probably the best one in the NFL, so they unfortunately are going to be the 5th seed, though, in my predictions. Then, to round it off here, the Los Angeles Rams, I have them still in the playoffs because their offense is going to be very good this year, adding Blake Corum, hopefully having Cooper Kupp healthy for the majority of the year. Matthew Stafford continues to be one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, even if nobody puts him up there. Sean McVay, a candidate for the Coach of the Year this year. I truly believe that. And also, their defense, it did get better, adding guys like Darius Williams, Tre'Davious White, I want to say Cameron Curl, if I'm not mistaken, as well at the safety spot. And through the draft, I really like them drafting Jared Verse and also his Florida State teammate as well. And they have young players already there that were very good. You look at Kobe Turner, Byron Young at the linebacker spot. But the challenge is being that young, right? Making that jump that you want to see from last year to this year. That's one of my concerns, and also the injuries could haunt this team. If Cooper Kupp or Matthew Stafford get hurt, that could really hurt their chances, so I couldn't put them that much higher. They're going to compete with the 49ers, but I just worry about those injuries a little bit here, more so than with the 49ers, obviously. And then the last team, maybe one of the biggest surprises, I think, for me, but I've been convinced. I've talked the Bears up a lot this offseason, and they're in an extremely difficult division, obviously, but, why not? Why can't it be the Bears? They have almost everything in place that you would like to have in a playoff team, right? You have Keenan, Rome, DJ Moore, DeAndre Swift on a playoff team last year. Their defense, very, very underrated. They have a lot of good players on that defense. One of the best defenses in the league towards the second half of the year. It's just about getting everything in order pretty much this year. They have the 3rd easiest schedule in the NFL as well. And Caleb Williams, if you guys didn't know, is a very good quarterback already. I think you can see it just the way that he plays, the way that he carries himself, the way that this team already is rallying around him, following him as a leader already. It's just a matter of time for them to get everything in order, and I think with the schedule in their favor, good players on this roster as well, credit to Ryan Poles and all their staff, they're going to have enough competing with other teams like the Bucks or the Saints or maybe even the Seahawks being in there as well. I think they could go toe-to-toe with a lot of those teams just trying to make that last playoff spot. So we're going to throw a surprise in there. The Chicago Bears will make it in the playoffs this year in the NFC. 3 teams from the NFC North will make the playoffs. Very confident in that division. The Northern divisions in the NFL overall, probably the 2 best. The AFC South is up there though, I will say, but the NFC North and the AFC North, very, very competitive this year. There are going to be a lot of good games in those divisions this year, in my opinion. But speaking of divisions and some of the best, some of the worst, we're going to talk about, lastly now, the series finale of my predictions for the final division in the NFL. We're going to talk about the AFC West, who I have finishing 4-1, and why I have them in each of those spots. So that is coming up right after this break. Don't go anywhere. Thank you for joining me here on the last segment of today's show. Just about an hour now from the first game of the NFL regular season, and one of those teams is featured on this last segment of mine, predicting what the AFC West division is going to finish out like in 2024. We're going to look at the Broncos, the Chargers, the Raiders, and the Chiefs, of course, and figure out which one of these teams is going to finish in spots 1 through 4. And so, without further ado, we're going to start off with that number 4 team. I have the Broncos. Unfortunately for them, finishing last in the AFC West this year. It's just a matter of fact that they're just starting, I think, this process with Bo Nix now. And if you guys weren't able to tell already, these restarts, these new beginnings for some of these teams don't really sit well with me, as well as Bo Nix played. As good of a coach that Sean Payton is historically, right, having success, I think that it's never really felt great with me putting these restarts anywhere higher than 4th, just because, again, you have a lot on your plate just right off of the bat. And while Bo Nix might be an experienced rookie, looking great like I mentioned in the preseason, it's still a massive jump when you actually get into regular season football. Some of the departures that they had, Russell Wilson being one of them, also Jerry Jeudy leaving, Justin Simmons, they were able to replace them with Josh Reynolds. Not so much Justin Simmons, but obviously Bo Nix coming in there as well. I mentioned it just before in this episode that Russell Wilson did get criticized a lot last year. The relationship with Sean Payton wasn't great, but he had a solid year for them. He was up there in some of the production stats, just playing very well from a quarterback spot for this Broncos team and had them in a lot of close games. So now Bo Nix has to live up to that in his first year, and if he doesn't, I just feel like the Broncos are more likely than not to finish last in this division. They couldn't really add anybody else in free agency because of the whole salary cap issue with Russell Wilson being in that hole, trying to dig themselves out of that. It's tough, and they couldn't add too many pieces to their roster already, so they're one of the teams that, didn't really improve that much as well. So I have them finishing last this year in the AFC West. And then, just moving on barely from them at number 3, I think the Chargers will finish number 3 this year. Still have a ways to go in what this team ultimately wants themselves to look like in the future under Jim Harbaugh. It's tough this year with having to make some tough decisions, getting rid of Keenan Allen and trying to build up this roster and make it a competitive roster at that as well. You bring in Jim Harbaugh as well. You have a quarterback in place, which is great with Justin Herbert. I think he's going to benefit this offense a lot. Just having that franchise quarterback is going to make things a lot easier for them. But with that being said, the defensive side of the ball for this team really concerns me even still. They have, good players like Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack, and Derwin James, but even still, we're talking about a defense that was bottom 10 in points allowed last year and bottom 5 in yards per game allowed as well. And they didn't make too many changes on that side of the ball. So with that and the lack of offensive firepower for Justin Herbert, I think it's going to be enough having Herbert to kind of mask it. But in this division as well, when it looks like, regarding what I said about the Broncos, they do have offensive firepower. Courtland Sutton there, Josh Reynolds. This Chargers team would love to have a guy like Courtland Sutton. Same thing with the Raiders, just talking about them a little bit in advance. Jacoby Myers, Devontae Adams, obviously, Brock Bowers. They have a lot of offensive firepower, and we're not even talking about the Chiefs yet. You need guys like that to compete in this division, and lacking that, I think, will haunt them in some games, not being able to put up enough points. That's what the NFL is pretty much nowadays. So the lack of doing that, the uncertainty around that, hoping that guys like Ladd McConkey step up, Quentin Johnson as well. They're trying to focus around the running game, which is great. I like J.K. Dobbins, and I like also Gus Edwards with the offensive line work that they were able to do. But at the end of the day, when you're going up against some of the better teams, offensively, you need to throw the ball efficiently, and I'm not sure if I can rely on those guys yet to get over that hump. They have an easy schedule, the easiest schedule in the division, which should benefit them, honestly, but I don't think it's enough to get them any higher than number 3. With that being the case, it means that obviously the Raiders are going to finish number 2 for me. But they're one of those teams where if it goes according to plan, I guess it is kind of like all teams, but more so with the Raiders, if it all goes according to plan, Gardner Minshew is better than what Jimmy Garoppolo got you last year, they have enough to finish number 2 in this division. I really believe that for a couple of reasons, right? You look no further than the guy on your screen, the best offensive player in this division. Outside of quarterbacks, you can debate Travis Kelce, but at this point in his career, I think you would take Devontae Adams where he is in his career right now. He's the best player outside of quarterbacks in this division. And with that being said, it really relies or depends a lot of their success on him, obviously, but also Gardner Minshew, like I just mentioned. Coming in now, beating out Aiden O'Connell, who had that experience with the Raiders last year, to beat out Aiden O'Connell, and now him being the guy right off of the bat, it means they have a lot of confidence in him. They believe that he is able to provide them with better production than obviously Aiden O'Connell did last year, alongside with their offensive coordinator Luke Getsy. Both of those guys have to work together to get more out of this team than Josh McDaniels or Jimmy Garoppolo did out of them just a year ago. It was very frustrating. I'm sure you guys saw, if you saw the Receiver series on Netflix, that it got to a very nerve-wracking point with Devontae Adams that he was, actually considering just leaving, throwing it all away, and just getting out of there. Luckily for them, Antonio Pierce came in. Another reason why I'm high on the Raiders. I really like Antonio Pierce as a coach. I think he brings the right mindset to this team, and just roster-wise, compared to the Broncos and the Chargers, just offensively, they have Devontae Adams, obviously. Brock Bowers comes in. can line up at tight end. You could put him at wide receiver as well. Jacoby Myers is one of the more underrated receivers in the NFL. He played great for them last year. They have the pieces in place to help Gardner Minshew. It's just really up to Gardner to make those throws when they will become available for this team. And also on the defensive side of the ball, not a lot of people, I think, really realize that the Raiders were a top 10 team in terms of points allowed last year in the NFL. They averaged allowing 19.5 points per game last year, which is very good. Regardless of yards or anything like that, if you can prevent teams from scoring on you, it's a great thing. It's a fantastic thing. If teams get to the red zone, but you bunker down and stop them, limit them to field goals and things like that, it makes a difference, especially in this division with all the offensive firepower that they have. And on top of that, on top of having a guy like Max Crosby, they add Christian Wilkins on top of that, which is a deadly duo for Justin Herbert, Bo Nix, Patrick Mahomes. All these guys that are going to have to face those two in the middle is going to be a nightmare. So having a good defense already from last year, I think, is another reason why I'm so high on the Raiders. They do have a tough schedule. They do have the, I want to say, 8th toughest schedule in the NFL, the toughest schedule in this division. But even so, I think they have enough, barring that the quarterback plays out like they hope that it does. I think they do have enough to finish number 2. And then, obviously, to end out this segment, end out this show, no surprise, the Chiefs are the number 1 team. I have them as the number 1 team in the entire conference. They're going to win this division. They're obviously better. The Chiefs just really not thinking about the AFC West just singularly. It sounds weird to say, but they're good enough to obviously think bigger than that. We're talking about history with the Chiefs now, right? They're on the verge of three-peating with Super Bowl championships, never done in this era of the NFL, or in NFL history, obviously, I should say. So they're thinking long-term. They're on that type of level where everybody else in this division is trying to figure out their quarterback, trying to figure out the rest of their roster. For the Chargers, same thing. The rest of their roster, young quarterbacks coming in. Do you have enough on defense for some of these teams? The Chiefs aren't thinking of any of that. They're thinking about the end game now. They're thinking about cementing themselves in history as a team more so than they have individually with Travis, obviously, Patrick, obviously. That's where they are. There's levels to this, right? Is what everybody always says. The Chiefs are going to win this division. They're a lot better. Defensively, they didn't lose too much also, so they're right there with, last year their offense wasn't as good as it was this year, and they won the Super Bowl, obviously, getting in those moments. When you get to those tight moments, those pressure moments, I don't think anybody is more comfortable than this team alongside Andy Reid and his play calling. They have everything in place to win this division, so not an exciting pick, I know that, but it's the truth. It is the matter of fact. They're going to win this division. And once the playoffs start, it's going to be them against everybody. Everyone's going to try to be taking them down, and they're as prepared as anybody. So they're going to win this division. Those are my picks for how the AFC West will finish out this year. That is all of the divisions here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast that we went through. Now, just about an hour or so till kickoff, we are wrapping up this show to get you guys out of here to go watch that game. I want to thank you guys, though, for tuning in to today's episode. Please make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the network on all forms of social media. If you want to catch more of this show, check out both YouTube channels, the GSMC Podcast Network channel and the GSMC Sports Network channel, to catch more NFL content with this show in a variety of different ways. And lastly, a reminder to tune in every weekday to check out more stories, coverage of all stories in the NFL with me, Manny Maradiegue, as your host. Thanking you guys for joining me yet again, and I'll see you guys back here on Monday to recap tonight's game and talk some more about the game tomorrow, the first ever one in Brazil.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.